But this is the needs analysis tool, which is what we call step one. This is the tool that is normally completed on the phone conversation of the first meeting. So if you're a tenant rep and you're meeting with the client, this is what you're doing. If you're on the phone with the owner of the property, this is typically what you're doing. There's 9 areas that we want to interview this prospect to determine, do I even want to make a presentation? And the categories are resources. It's the ability of them to be able to perform financially. Urgency, it has everything to do with timing. Lease expiration, mortgage due date, partnership dissolving, fund liquidating. Needs, more space, more productivity, more natural light, better place to recruit. We need to unlock our equity. Services for a fee. We need facility management, we need property management, we need lease administration, we need a broker opinion of value. We've identified over 100 services that brokers and firms charge for a fee. And matter of fact, almost all of our national accounts over the last few years have done everything in their power to make sure that 40 to 45% of their revenue is coming from non-transaction revenue. Almost half now. They pride themselves in saying almost half our revenue has nothing to do with a commission. It's a facility management, it's a property management, it's lease administration, it's all the services we provide. But what's crazy, most of the broker is the tip of the spear. They're not finding out that there's services that clients need that the firm can perform, because in my mind, that's how we come through the back door. Causes: slow response times, an aggravation managing, the property is going to need capital, we've just lost a major tenant. Loyalty: what's the relationship with your firm or with your competitor? Expectations: are they realistic about what today's market's all about? I want to buy a CVS or a Walgreens with at least 15 years remaining on the lease, and I want a 10 cap.
Me too.
Guess what I'm not going to do today?
Give you a listing.
You're not going to buy a CVS. I want a Walgreens or CVS with at least 10 to 12 years left on the lease, and I'd be around a 6 cap. More reasonable, right? So expectations are they realistic about what's going on? Authority: who is going to be in the presentation, and do they have authority? And if not, how do I then present what I have that will get it approved? And then finally is revenue. How much money will I make off this assignment? The fact that they want a presentation doesn't mean that I should give them one. And this is what a runs clear worksheet looks like. The lowest that a prospect can be is a 9. They scored a 1 in each category. That is a goat rodeo. That is a waste of time. There's no reason to get marketing involved with a 9. All right? They're busy enough as it is. There's no reason to have a conference call, webinar with team members for a 9. Will, you with me? Yep. It's a waste of time. A 45 is nirvana. A 45 is where you get a pup tent and you put it outside their office and you just kind of take up residence. This prospect came in at a 34. That's strong. That they're going to get a presentation. A couple of other areas that I'd love to move to a 4 or 5, but still, 34 is a wonderful place to begin. So you need to make the conscious decision. The fact that they want a presentation, are they qualified enough to make a presentation? Not everyone you have a phone conversation with. Now, for decades, I have tried to convince tenant rep brokers that not everyone is qualified that takes their call, but I've not been able to convince them. They think anyone that'll meet with them, they're qualified. I've had brokers, tenant rep brokers, at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, take an hour and a half to go meet a 9. But the fact that they said that they would meet with them, and there's nothing I can do, it's in their DNA, so there's no sense to me trying to train it out of them. It is what it is. Because I've had tenant reps say, if they want to meet with me, I'll meet with them. They want a presentation, I'll present them. So it is what it is. Capital markets brokers and agency brokers tend to be a little bit more cerebral. This tool then applies. If they score a high enough, and I get this all the time, where do you decide you're not going to present, right? Who's thinking that? Well, that could be the gut. Let's say it's 2008 or 9. I'm going to present to a 9. I got nothing going on. Let's say it's today. It's got to be high 20s, low 30s. We got a lot of stuff going on. So you just need to be realistic. What do you have on your plate today? What does your pipeline look like? All right. So they get a good score on what we call step 1, or also known as touch point 1. And when you get this deck, you've seen it, there is the definition for each one of these categories, all right? So you'll all understand what needs and loyalty and expectations are about. Touch point 2, and also we have a whole class on just the perfect question. To me, we win more business not by the statements we make, but the questions we ask. I'm going to say that again, because I've said it for years. We win more business not by the statements we make, but the questions we ask. The best brokers are great interviewers. So there's 4 types of questions that I'm asking as I'm filling out Runs Clear. We have hundreds of questions that we have developed for you for your question bank. Just what do you look for is known as Open Probe 1. What do you look for in access? What do you look for in ways to improve your employee productivity? What do you look for in ways to grow your revenue? What do you look for in ways to get closer to your customers? What do you look for in ways to improve your customer care? There's hundreds of questions that we have developed for each one of these base questions. Because why should a broker have to say, what questions do I ask now? Let's just give them the questions that we have validated works that gives them valuable information. I don't like this next best practice. I love it. This best practice, which is a discovery best practice, has helped us win more sales by itself. Client calls up and says, Mike, we're thinking about doing some of this and some of that. And the first thing I say is, we would love to be able to generate a proposal, but to really give you a proposal that meets what you're looking for, we'd like to have at least a 30-minute webinar to do a needs analysis. Well, who should be on that webinar? Well, any stakeholder that'll be involved in making the decision. And they said, it takes 30 minutes. And I said, yeah, we're going to send you a webinar link, and Jennifer will whiteboard everything that we hear, and we'll organize it, and then we'll be able to generate a presentation or a proposal that's specific to what you have. If I could convince you that if I could get you to start doing this, it would change your world. It amazes me that tenant rep brokers, this isn't standard operating procedure. Because a tenant could want 1,000 different things. Now in capital markets, when should I sell it? What should I sell it for? Should I fix it up before? You know, but you still want to do a whiteboard. But for tenant rep and corporate services, there is no possible way you can really develop a true client-centric presentation or proposal unless you whiteboard it. It is impossible. You're going to miss too much. So in the whiteboarding session, I actually used to go in, and I still do it occasionally. I go into those flip charts with the sticky stuff on the back. And I go in there, and I'll say, we're looking forward to generating a proposal. We're going to take a few minutes, and this is if they happen to be in town. And I start writing down my crummy handwriting and my inability to spell what I think they're telling me. And then I got 2 sheets up there, and I'll say, can you share with me in order of priority what's most important to you? And I put a 1, and I circle it, and I go to the next one, I put a 2, and then I come over here and put a 3. Who's with me? That's easy enough, isn't it? I can't imagine why you wouldn't do it. It takes 30 minutes. And by the way, you've almost won the assignment just there without even making the presentation, because my preference is never having to create the proposal. I'd rather see you win the assignment off the needs analysis because you're selling subtly all the way. So let's say I'm working with REITs. Can you tell me everything that's important to you? And then I ask a question like this, say, you know, we've had years of experience with REITs. What other services are you providing to grow your FFO? That was a question, wasn't it? But to a sophisticated CFO or COO at a REIT, when I asked that question, what other services are you providing to grow your FFO? What did they just think about that question? Come on now. Well, not only am I one of them, but more importantly, we're not doing that much. I wonder what Mike knows that we should know. Who's with me? I win more business by asking the question than by, you know, giving them all these statements. And you'll become very skilled at which questions to ask that really make that impression. Now watch. They tell me everything they want, and I want you all to know that the stuff that you're seeing are actual items that were given to us by prospects. Now this would be a whiteboarding session where we go into someone's conference room and we connect our laptop and we open up a Word document, and we just do it that way. Because I can't spell and they can't read my handwriting, so I stopped doing it, but on a rare occasion. But because I travel 200 plus days a year, I don't have the luxury of being in Denver and Los Angeles and Kansas City and Newport Beach when they need me. So we oftentimes do it by webinar. So I meet with Frank, who is in Newport Beach. But John is in the Dallas office. We send John a webinar link. Do not do a needs analysis by conference call with no whiteboard. They're going to forget what you said. It's got to have a whiteboard. So I'm in your office. We connected John into the webinar. So you're seeing in Dallas what we're seeing in Newport Beach. So far, so good? Tell me everything that's important to you. A couple of these items up here. Remember I referred to Bill Kent in D.C. that sold a lifestyle center for $108 million, but his BOV was $100 million? Remember that story? These were some of the items that came from the whiteboarding session. And here's what's crazy. The first one that the client told Bill he wanted him to cover was the pending tax appeal. But Bill did not know there was a pending tax appeal, because the seller wanted to know, should we take this property to market before or after the appeal? We think we know what we're going to get back, but people might say, well, you haven't gotten it, so you can't count it. So can you defend that that number is going to be? Bill said, I had no idea, first, that there was a pending tax bill, and I had no idea that was an important item they wanted me to cover. I mean, you think it's a capital markets presentation. Should I take it to market? What's it going to sell for? Who's going to be the buyer? And what's your experience? You can't have that assumption. Another, it was primarily retail, but it had a little bit of office. And they said, Bill, let me ask you a question. Because of a little bit of office, will that discourage a retail buyer? Should we separate the two buildings and sell one as retail and one as office, or can we combine the NOI? He never thought about that. Wouldn't have known it unless he asked the question. So then you'll see over here our legend, S equals structured and Y equals yellow pad, right? And now we'll say, as I've already said, there's two ways that we can make a presentation. One is the kind you've seen many times, Marcia, and the other is where we take those items which are statistical or factual, we get those out of the way, and then we get into the discussion items. Which would you prefer that we do next week? Oh, I want the conversation presentation. Well, as you look at this right here, tell me which items you want in the structure part of the presentation or the statistical. And I actually go S, S, S. Now tell me in order of priority. S1, S2, S3. Now tell me which items you want to have the conversation around. The yellow pad items. I put the Y's up there, Y1, Y2, Y3. At that moment, I see the entire presentation. I have got the roadmap. The executive summary is going to be S2, S3, S1, and then go Y2, Y3, Y1. I'm going to follow that exact order in the presentation, S2, S3, S1, transition to yellow pad, Y2, Y3, close on Y1. The last slide in the deck is going to be a summation slide, S2, S3, S1, Y2, Y3, Y1. I got the assignment. I'm telling you. Yellow brick road. I'm giving it to you right now. Yes, yes, sir. Jim.
Are you labeling those X's and Y's in front of them?
Oh, great question. Thank you. I wouldn't have. They see the S's and the Y's. Then we clean this up. Because half the time they're going to say, Mike, could you give us a copy of this? I'll say, I'm going to take it back to the office. I'll get it to you in a half an hour. The other times, this becomes what we call touch point 3. So touch point 2 is the actual whiteboarding session on someone who qualified well and runs clear. Touch point 3 is we clean this up, our logo's on there, their logo's on there, needs analysis with the date, okay? We will never let them see the S's and the Y's again. That is only for us. So they will see it only the day of the whiteboarding session. When Jennifer cleans this up and sends it over to the client, the only ones that will ever see S's and Y's again will be us. And when we send over the whiteboarding session, we say, Madison, we really appreciate the time that you and your team gave us. I know there'll be a couple of individuals who will be in attendance to the presentation who didn't attend the whiteboarding session. If you would, please circulate it to them and find out if there's anything they want us to cover. So watch what happens. The chief executive officer, who was way too busy, actually didn't have time, she gets this thing from the chief financial officer. You know, Lipsy came in and did this thing, and well, what is this? These are the things we told them what we wanted them to cover, but they also want to know what you want to cover. Well, how about the other firms? Where's theirs? Well, this was the only firm that did it. Huh, really? Well, I want to talk about how do we avoid disruption And two, I want them to really spend a lot of time on how new layouts increase productivity. And now it comes back to me. And my point of contact says our CEO wants you to spend a lot of time on how we avoid disruption and how we improve productivity. Tell me I'm not way ahead of my competition. My competition had a phone conversation or got an RFP. And based on that, they're going to put together a winning presentation. You need to understand, an RFP is mechanics. A presentation is art. There is a big difference. And those of you that go in and use the response to the RFP as your presentation, good luck. Good luck. Yes.
What if they give you an RFP?
They will. They might very well give me an RFP, but I'll come back and say, John, this is really helpful, but we find there's oftentimes a lot of subtlety in what things need that aren't included in the RFP. And so what we'd like to do is take an extra few minutes to learn a little bit more about what's important to everybody. An RFP is oftentimes almost looks like they hired an academic to put it together, right? Have you ever seen these? I've looked at thousands of them. I said, there is no intelligent person that wrote this. This was a PhD or... Years ago, I get a call from GE. This is when they had a huge real estate division. Call goes like this. Mike, this is so-and-so with procurement, with GE. And he says this to me, and I didn't know what he was even, I didn't know what he meant. He says, I bet you want our meatball. I said, I have never heard that expression. He said, I bet you want GE's logo on your resume. I'd never heard that expression before. I bet you want our meatball. Because, you know, the GE logo is round, and maybe internally GE refers to their logo as a meatball, I guess. I said, I love meatballs, and I'd love to have yours. He says, I want a proposal. For what? Training and consulting for our real estate people globally. I said, I have no idea what to put in there. He was in Connecticut. I said, let me ask you a question. I'm willing to come spend the day up there and interview as many of these associates that I possibly can, and then I'll generate a proposal. He says, who's paying for the trip? I said, I'm paying for the trip. He says, send me an email that says you're paying for the trip, what you're going to do when you come here, and the questions you're going to ask. And I want you to meet with me first before you interview the first person. I said, I'll send you the email, and I did, and we set a date. And I go up to Connecticut, and I spend the entire day interviewing this real estate executive and that real estate executive, and I don't know how many I interviewed. But he wanted to have an exit interview with me around 3:30. He said, Mike, he says, I'm not going to tell you whether I'm going to give you the business or not, but I will tell you I've spoken to several people that you interviewed, and they were impressed with your knowledge of the industry and the questions that you asked. I will tell you, you've done yourself a lot of good by coming up here. I'm going needs analysis. When someone calls me that's a monster assignment, I'm not getting an RFP and preparing a presentation. I'm going to fight as hard as I can to get interviews, to do a whiteboarding session, to do a webinar at the minimum. So this is touch point 2 and touch point 3. Touch point 2 is the actual discovery session itself. Touch point 3 is the cleanup of the whiteboard, and then sending it to the group you've interviewed, extending it to other decision makers who will be in the presentation to get the additional items. So far, so good? Touch point 4. As I then send a draft agenda over to the client 2 to 3 days before I present. I am amazed at the number of folks who make major presentations to people that never have a meeting without an agenda, that you're going to make a presentation without an agenda. It is really kind of crazy when you think about it. I do not make a presentation, sales presentation, without an agenda that's been approved. But what you're going to find is the agenda is different than the executive summary. The executive summary is 100% what the client wants me to cover. The agenda is the executive summary plus the items that I want to add to my presentation. I'm not telling you that a presentation is 100% executive summary. The executive summary is 100% what the client wants. The agenda are the other items that you want to discuss. It could be recent experience, it could be your track record, it could be, in this case, how our other service lines can add value to this presentation, and more importantly, in this case, this is obviously a capital markets presentation. For what reason? What's number 6? debt structured finance. You're not going to see that in a tenant rep assignment unless it's going to be a lease first own. And so you can almost look at an agenda and see the items that the broker wants to add that says this is obviously a capital markets presentation. So now they understand they're going to cover our stuff, and they've also given us a heads up of what they are going to cover too. And they come back and they add a couple of other items, or they take an item out, and guess what? Now I have a roadmap. Now I know exactly what's got to be covered. Some of you are making presentations with no agenda. And I will tell you this, if it's a presentation and it's a small assignment, there's an agenda. We do not present a sales presentation without an agenda, even if it's a small opportunity. Everybody needs to know what we're going to cover, and I want to make sure I'm covering what they wanted me to cover. And I also want them to know that there's things that I wanted to add that I wanted to cover. Touch point 5. We send over a Meet the Team brochure. A Meet the Team brochure evolved out of large firms bringing busloads of people to a presentation. Making a presentation, got a bus. You don't have to say a word. We just want to show we're big and have lots of people that have nothing to do with this assignment. Need a couple of presidents that will say nothing because we would lose if you opened your mouth. And I'll get you coffee afterwards. So, particularly the sophisticated said, listen, you can bring 5, that's it. We don't need all those other people. So the Meet the Team brochure evolved out of the need for small firms to demonstrate we have access to space planners, mortgage bankers, appraisers, and environmental people. And if you've ever seen one of our Meet the Team brochures, they look like a Chili's menu. They got that fun, feel-good stock, and then there's action photographs of a space planner or an environmental engineer. So those are great for boutiques, but you're saying, you know, how do I compete with the national firms that have all these folks? Well, what you do is you have the best in practice service partners in your community that say, I want to be on your team if you have an opportunity for a tenant relocation, all right? The reason that our national clients use it is oftentimes they will send this over a couple days before the presentation, and they'll say, Elke, let me ask you a question. We hadn't even thought about this, but I didn't know you all had construction supervision capability. Is there any way that whoever is in that group could come over and pitch in on the presentations? I'd be delighted. So that happens a lot where they say, that's a cool capability that we never thought about. So we want them to know that even though they didn't share they needed construction management, we have that capability, and it kind of gets them thinking, bring them along, all right? So that's touch point 5. I haven't even presented yet, and I've touched the client how many times? And each one's legitimate, isn't it? Runs clear, whiteboard, circulate the whiteboard, circulate an agenda, Meet the Team brochure. Haven't even opened my mouth yet. I'm halfway to the win. Haven't spoken a word yet, right? I'm halfway home. And guess what my competitors are doing? They're still trying to figure out what they're supposed to do based off a 10-minute phone call and an RFP written by an academic. That's what they're trying to figure out. And I have customized a presentation to address exactly what they want, and I've separated those items that are statistical and then those items that are yellow pad.